Dad,
Dad,
someone is looking for you.
It's a woman.
It's a woman, Annie said, standing in the doorway of William Carter's home office. She says she needs to see you. William didn't look up from the screen. Tell her it has to be later, William said calmly. I'm in a meeting. Everyone who wants to see me schedules an appointment first. She can call the office and set a time like everyone else. Annie stayed where she was. She said it's important, Annie replied quietly. William pressed 2 fingers against his temple, still reading a document. Annie, this meeting is very important. Sometimes people show up here because they know our family has money. They think if they can talk to me for 5 minutes, I'll write a check and solve their problems. That's not how the world works. If she needs help, she can go through the proper channels. Annie looked down at the floor, thinking about that. Okay, she said softly. She turned and left the office, her small footsteps fading down the long hallway. William unmuted his microphone and continued the meeting. Let's move to page 12, he said. I want to review the insurance exposure before we finalize the partnership. About 10 minutes later, the office door opened again, faster this time. Annie stood there, slightly out of breath like she had been running. Dad, she said. William muted the call again, this time with a small sigh. Annie, I'm in the middle of... She wants to see you, Annie said. She won't leave. William leaned back in his chair, a little impatience showing now. I told you what to do. Did you tell her to call the office? Yes, Annie said, but she said I should tell you something. William looked at her, waiting. Annie hesitated. She said, you told her that if she ever needed help, she should come find you. William's expression changed slightly, but he didn't speak. And Dad, Annie added. She looks very familiar. I think I've seen her before. I'm sure I have. William was quiet for a moment, searching his memory, but nothing came immediately. He met thousands of people every year, employees, investors, partners, strangers at charity events, people who shook his hand and thanked him for things he barely remembered doing. Do you want to see her? Annie asked again. William looked at the screen, at the meeting waiting for him, at the numbers and contracts and people who depended on his decisions. This meeting decides whether we sign a deal with 3 hospitals, he said. Hundreds of jobs, Annie. Millions of dollars. Sometimes being responsible means you can't stop everything because one person shows up at the gate. Annie listened carefully. But she keeps saying it's about a promise, Annie said. She said you would remember. William felt a strange feeling in his chest then, something small but heavy, like a book falling shut somewhere in his memory. A promise? He repeated. Annie nodded. She said if you heard her name, you would come out. But she told me not to say it. She said you should remember by yourself. William stood up slowly this time. On the screen, someone was talking about projected losses, but William reached forward and turned off his camera. Take 10 minutes, he said to the meeting. We'll continue shortly. He walked around the desk and toward the door. Annie stepped aside, then quickly walked next to him as they moved down the hallway together. Is she in trouble? Annie asked. I don't know, William said honestly. Are you in trouble? Annie asked. William almost smiled at that, but there was no humor in his eyes. I don't know that either, he said. They reached the front door, and Annie pushed it open. The late afternoon air was cool, and the long driveway stretched out toward the front gate. There, Annie said, pointing. A woman stood just outside the gate, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't dressed like someone coming to a business meeting. She looked like someone who had come because she had run out of choices. William took a few steps forward, then stopped. Even from a distance, he recognized her. And in that moment, something inside him dropped, heavy and sudden, like an elevator falling too fast. He remembered a different day, a different place, and a woman standing under harsh white hospital lights, speaking calmly to a frightened little girl while doctors moved around them. He remembered signing papers. He remembered a plastic chair, a vending machine humming in the corner, and this same woman saying, she's going to be okay, even though Annie wasn't her child. He remembered taking out his card and handing it to her. If you ever need anything, he had said. Anything at all. You call me. Or you come find me. Now she had come to find him. William walked the rest of the way to the gate slowly, Annie's small footsteps following behind him. When he stopped in front of her, the woman looked up at him. Her face was tired, but her eyes were steady. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I'm sorry to come without an appointment." William couldn't speak for a moment. Then she said the one sentence he had been trying to remember since Annie walked into his office. "You told me that if I ever needed help," she said quietly, "I should come find you." William Carter stood very still after the woman finished speaking. "I told you. I called you," the woman said again, this time more gently, as if she could see he was trying to remember, many times. "I called your office. I left messages with your assistant. I sent emails. I even came to your company once, but they told me I needed an appointment, and your schedule was fully booked for weeks." William swallowed slightly. He didn't remember the calls themselves, but he remembered the system. Layers of assistants, filters, schedules, priority lists. Important people first. Important deals first. Important problems first. People like this woman rarely made it through those layers. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," she continued. "I know how this looks, showing up at your house, but I didn't know what else to do. My son's doctor said we were running out of time, and the only person I could think of who might be able to help was you, because of what you said that night." She looked him directly in the eyes when she said the next sentence. "You told me that if I ever needed help, I should come find you. So I came. I'm here because of that promise. Mr. Carter, I'm here to ask you to keep it." William felt the weight of those words settle heavily in his chest. Behind him, Annie stepped a little closer, her small fingers curling around his hand again. "Dad," she said softly, "what promise?" William didn't answer right away. He finally spoke, but he spoke to Annie, not to the woman. "2 years ago," he said slowly, "you and I hadn't known each other very long yet. Do you remember the hospital? The big one downtown?" Annie nodded. "I remember the waiting room, and the orange juice you bought me from the machine even though it was very bad." Despite everything, William almost smiled. "Yes," he said, "that one." He looked back at the woman briefly, then continued speaking to Annie. "That night, you were very sick," he said carefully, choosing his words so he didn't frighten her. "And I wasn't there when you first got to the hospital. I got there later, but she was already there." Annie looked at the woman again, her eyes wide, trying to place the memory. "She stayed with you," William said. "She talked to the doctors. She signed papers. She made sure they took care of you until I arrived. She didn't know you. She didn't know me. But she stayed anyway." Annie was very quiet now. William continued, his voice lower. "When I got there and saw you sleeping in that hospital bed, and I saw that a stranger had stayed for hours to make sure you were safe, I told her that if she ever needed help in this life, she could call me, and I would help her, no matter what." Annie looked down at the ground, thinking very hard in the serious way she did when something important was happening. "So, this is that promise?" she asked. "Yes," William said quietly. "This is that promise." They stood there in silence for a moment, the three of them connected by a night from 2 years ago that none of them had forgotten. The woman spoke again, more softly now. "I wouldn't have come if there was any other way," she said. "I tried everything first. Insurance, other hospitals, other doctors. But every door kept closing. And every time another door closed, I remembered what you said in that hospital hallway. So I kept trying to reach you. And when no one called me back, I decided I had to come here myself." William nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "I'm not asking you to save the world," she said. "I'm just asking you to help me save my son. You told me once that if I ever needed help, I should find you. So I found you." If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from, because every story connects people from different places. And if you believe kindness and keeping promises still matter in this world, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. Annie tugged lightly on William's hand. He looked down at her. "Dad," she said, "are we going to help her because she helped me?" William looked at Annie for a long moment before answering. "Yes," he said, "we are." Then he looked back at the woman at the gate. He was thinking about a hospital hallway, a plastic chair, and a promise he had made when he was simply a father who was afraid of losing a child. "Tell me your son's name," William said. "Daniel," she replied. "His name is Daniel." William nodded once. "All right," he said. "I'm going to make some calls. I don't know how difficult this is going to be yet, but I'm going to try." The woman closed her eyes for a brief second, and when she opened them again, they were wet but steady. "Thank you," she said. "That's all I was asking for. Just try." William turned toward the house, and Annie walked beside him again, still holding his hand. As they reached the front door, Annie looked up at him and asked one more question. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Why didn't you call her back before?" William stopped walking. He looked out across the long driveway toward the gate where the woman was still standing, small and alone against the evening light. Then he answered with a quiet honesty that he rarely allowed anyone to hear. "Because I was busy," he said. "And sometimes, Annie, being busy is just another way of saying we forgot what really matters." Annie squeezed his hand. "Then we should help her," she said simply. "So you don't forget again?" William nodded once, then opened the door and walked back into his office, already reaching for his phone, already knowing that from this moment on, he was no longer deciding whether to help. He was deciding what he was willing to lose in order to keep a promise. When William walked back into his office, the voices on the screen were still talking, still waiting, still discussing numbers that, only 30 minutes ago, had seemed important enough to delay everything else in his life. He sat down slowly, but he didn't turn the camera back on right away. For a moment, he just looked at his own reflection in the black screen. A man in an expensive suit, in a beautiful office, in a house big enough to echo when you walk through it alone. "Mr. Carter?" One of the board members' voices came through the speaker. "Are you still with us?" William pressed the button and turned the camera back on. 12 faces immediately looked back at him. "Yes," he said calmly. "I'm here. We were reviewing the insurance exposure tied to Street Matthews," the woman from Chicago said. "If we move forward with the acquisition, we inherit all high-risk surgical liabilities. Our recommendation is still to reduce exposure by limiting approval for extreme risk cases." William leaned back slightly in his chair. "Define extreme risk," he said. The man from Boston answered. "Surgeries with a projected survival rate below 40%. They cost millions. And if the patient dies, the legal and media fallout can be significant." William's face did not change, but Annie's voice echoed in his head. "Are we going to help her because she helped me? What if the surgery is the only chance the patient has?" William asked. "That doesn't change the math," the Boston man replied. "We're not a charity, William. We're running a business." There was a time when William would have agreed without hesitation. In fact, there was a time when he had written policies that said exactly that. He looked at the documents on his screen, but he was no longer seeing numbers. He was seeing a woman standing at a gate, holding herself together with nothing but a promise someone else had made. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow," William said suddenly. There was a pause on the call. "Tomorrow?" the Chicago woman repeated. "We're supposed to vote tonight." "I know," William said. "We'll vote tomorrow." "William," the Boston man said, his tone tightening slightly. "This acquisition is time-sensitive." William looked directly into the camera now, his voice calm but leaving no room for argument. "Tomorrow," he repeated. And then he ended the call. The screen went black. For a few seconds he sat there in silence. Then he picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for, Dr. Leonard Hayes, one of the best cardiac surgeons in the country, semi-retired, only took special cases. Also the lead surgeon for a medical foundation partially funded by William's company. William pressed call. It rang 4 times before a deep, older voice answered. "Hayes. Leonard, it's William Carter." A short pause. "This must be important," the doctor said. "You only call me directly when you want something difficult." William didn't bother denying it. "I need you to look at a case. 8-year-old boy. Severe heart condition. They say it's high risk." "They always say it's high risk when they don't want to touch it," Hayes replied. "Send me the file." "I don't have the file yet," William said. "I need you to agree to see him first." There was a longer pause this time. "That's not how I work, William. I don't take cases because powerful people ask me to. I take cases because I think I can save the patient. I know, William said. I'm not asking you to do the surgery. I'm asking you to look at him. That's all. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a moment. You sound different, he said. Usually when you call me, you already have 3 lawyers and a contract ready. William leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a second. This one's not business, he said. This one's a promise. On the other end of the line, the old surgeon exhaled slowly. Send me the hospital name and the boy's information, he said. I'll go see him tomorrow morning. No guarantees. That's all I'm asking for, William said. He hung up and immediately made 3 more calls, one to the hospital administrator, one to his foundation director, and one to his insurance division. Each call was calm, precise, and left no confusion about what he wanted done. By the time he finished, nearly an hour had passed. When he finally walked out of his office, Annie was sitting on the floor in the hallway with a book open in her lap, though she wasn't really reading. She looked up the moment he opened the door. Did you call the doctor? She asked. Yes, William said. Is he going to help the boy? He's going to see him tomorrow, William replied. That's the first step. Annie nodded like that was a very serious and important step. Where's his mom? Annie asked. In the guest house, William said. Mrs. Turner is making her something to eat. Annie stood up and walked over to him. Was your meeting very important? She asked. William looked down at her and thought about the contracts, the hospitals, the vote that was supposed to happen tonight. It was important, he said, but not more important than this. Annie seemed satisfied with that answer. She slipped her hand into his again as they walked toward the back of the house. Dad? She said after a moment. Yes? Are you in trouble because you're helping them? William thought about the board, the insurance division, the policies he himself had signed years ago, the headlines that could appear if this surgery went wrong. Yes, he said honestly. I might be. Annie was quiet for a few steps. Then she said, That's okay. You told me brave people do the right thing even when it causes problems. William stopped walking. He looked down at her, this small girl who had come into his life without warning and rearranged it without asking permission. Did I tell you that? He asked. Annie nodded. The first week I lived here. When I broke the glass in the kitchen and told you the truth. William remembered that. She had stood there, so small, waiting to be sent away, and he had realized in that moment that what she feared most was not punishment. It was being left. He squeezed her hand gently. Then I guess I have to be brave now, he said. They continued walking toward the guest house where a tired mother was sitting at a small table, waiting for news that would decide whether her son lived or died. And for the first time in many years, William Carter was not thinking like a billionaire. He was thinking like a man who had made a promise and finally understood that some promises are not measured in money, they are measured in consequences. When William entered the guest house, he saw the woman sitting at the small wooden table near the window, a cup of tea in front of her that had already gone cold. She was sitting very straight, her hands wrapped around the cup as if she were trying to keep them from shaking. She stood up immediately when he walked in, like people do around men they believe are more important than they are. You don't have to stand, William said gently. She nodded, but she didn't sit back down right away. Annie walked in behind William and gave the woman a small, polite wave before quietly sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her, watching the adults with wide, observant eyes. I called a surgeon, William said, getting straight to the point. One of the best. He's going to see your son tomorrow morning and review the case himself. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, and William could see the way her shoulders dropped slightly, like someone had just taken a small portion of the weight she had been carrying. Thank you, she said. That's more than anyone else has been willing to do. What hospital is your son at? William asked. Street Matthews, she replied. William gave a small nod. That was one of the hospitals in the acquisition deal. Of course it was. Life had a strange way of connecting problems when you least needed them to be connected. I've already spoken to the administration, William said. They're expecting Dr. Hayes tomorrow. They'll make sure your son is ready for evaluation. The woman hesitated, then said, There's something else you should know. William waited. Our insurance refused to approve the surgery, she said. That's why the hospital won't schedule it. They said the operation is too expensive and too risky. Without insurance approval, we can't even get on the surgery list. William felt a slow, cold realization move through him. What insurance company? He asked, though something in him already knew the answer. She told him the name. It was one of his companies. For a moment, William didn't speak. Annie looked from him to the woman, sensing the shift in the room even if she didn't fully understand it. They said the policy doesn't cover experimental or high-risk procedures. The woman continued quietly. They said even if the doctor agrees to do the surgery, the insurance will not pay for it. And the hospital won't do it without financial approval. William walked to the window and looked out into the darkening yard. He put one hand in his pocket, the other resting against the glass. 5 years ago, he had approved a restructuring plan for the insurance division. It had been presented to him with charts and projections and phrases like sustainability and long-term stability. The change had saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars. One of those changes had been a policy limiting coverage for high-risk surgeries with low survival probability. At the time, it had made perfect business sense. Now an 8-year-old boy was going to die because of it. "Dad?" Annie's voice came softly from behind him. William turned around. "Is something wrong?" she asked. William looked at her for a long moment before answering. "The insurance company that said no to the surgery," he said slowly, "belongs to me." Annie frowned, trying to understand. "You mean, you're the one who said no?" The question was simple. The answer was not. "I didn't know about this specific case," William said. "But yes, the rule that allowed them to say no. I approved that rule." The woman quickly shook her head. "I'm not blaming you," she said. "I know companies have rules. I know this is business. I just didn't know where else to go." William nodded slowly. But Annie was still looking at him. "So, if it's your rule," she said carefully, "can't you change it?" William let out a long breath. "It's not that simple," he said. "If I change the rule for one person, I have to change it for everyone. It could cost the company a lot of money. People on the board won't like it. Investors won't like it." Annie thought about that. Then she asked the question that no one else in William's world would ever ask. "But if you don't change it, the boy might die, right?" William didn't answer. Annie slid off the couch and walked over to him. She was very small, standing next to him, but she looked up at him with the kind of steady gaze that made it impossible to lie. "Dad," she said quietly, 2 years ago when that lady helped me, did she ask if we had insurance first?" William felt something twist sharply in his chest. "No," he said. "Did she ask if helping me would cost her money?" Annie asked. "No," he said again. Annie nodded slowly. "Then I think this is not a business problem," she said. "I think this is a promise problem." The room went very quiet after that. The woman looked down at her hands, and William looked at Annie like he was seeing her clearly for the first time in a long time. Not just as a child he had taken responsibility for, but as a person who saw the world in lines that were much simpler and much harder to ignore. Finally, William spoke. "I'm going back to the office," he said. "I need to make more calls." He looked at the woman. "Tomorrow morning, Dr. Hayes will see your son, and tonight, I'm going to talk to my insurance division." The woman stood up again. "Mr. Carter, whatever happens, thank you for trying. I know you didn't have to." William shook his head slightly. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did have to." He turned and walked back toward the main house with Annie beside him. "Dad?" Annie said as they walked. "Yes? Are you going to change the rule?" she asked. William was silent for a long moment as they walked down the dim hallway toward his office, toward his phone, toward the world where decisions like that were never simple and never cheap. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Annie slipped her hand into his again. "I think you will," she said. "Because you told me once that money is something people use to decide what matters to them." William looked down at her. "I said that?" "Yes," Annie replied. "You said poor people use money to buy things they need. Rich people use money to decide who they want to be." William stopped walking. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he nodded once, squeezed her hand gently, and continued walking toward his office, knowing that before this night was over, He was going to find out exactly who he had decided to be. William closed the office door behind him and did not turn the lights on right away. The room was dim, lit only by the city glow coming through the tall windows and the faint blue light from his computer screen waking up as he approached the desk. For a long moment, he just stood there, both hands resting on the back of his chair, his head slightly lowered like a man preparing himself for a difficult conversation. Then he picked up his phone and called the head of his insurance division. The call connected on the second ring. "This is Martin." "Martin, it's William," he said. There was an immediate shift in the other man's voice. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" "No," William said calmly. "It's not. I'm looking at a case at Street Matthews. 8-year-old boy. Severe cardiac condition. Your department denied coverage for the surgery." There was a brief pause as Martin pulled up the file. William could hear keyboard typing on the other end. "Yes, I see it," Martin said after a moment. "High-risk procedure. Low survival probability. Falls under the exclusion policy for non-approved experimental cardiac operations. The denial is consistent with company guidelines." "I know it's consistent," William said. "I approved the guidelines. I'm asking you to make an exception." Another pause. Longer this time. "Sir," Martin said carefully, "if we make an exception on a case like this, it sets a precedent. We'll have hundreds of similar requests. The board has been very clear about maintaining the policy. These surgeries cost millions. And when they fail, families sue, the media gets involved, and we lose twice financially and legally." William walked slowly around his desk as he listened, his hand tightening slightly around the phone. "What are the chances if the surgery is performed?" William asked. "The file says 30 to 40% survival," Martin replied. "Without surgery, the file estimates less than 10% chance of surviving the year." William stopped walking. "So we're not deciding whether this is a good investment," William said quietly. "We're deciding whether a child has a 30% chance to live or a 10% chance to live." "Sir, that's not how the board will see it," Martin said. "They'll see it as a multi-million-dollar procedure with a high probability of failure." William was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "I want the denial reversed." "Mr. Carter," Martin hesitated. "I strongly advise against doing that without a board vote." "Then schedule a board vote," William said. "Tonight." "Tonight?" Martin sounded genuinely surprised. "That's not enough time to prepare." "Tonight," William repeated, his voice calm but final. "And Martin, until that vote happens, put the case under executive review. No final denial. No file closure. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Martin said. William hung up and set the phone down on the desk. He stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he leaned forward and placed both hands on the desk, his head lowered. For the first time in years, this was not a problem he could solve by writing a check or buying a company. This was a problem he had created himself, and now he had to decide whether he was willing to dismantle part of his own empire to fix it. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he said. Annie pushed the door open slightly and stepped inside. She had changed into her pajamas, and she was holding the small inhaler in one hand, turning it slowly like she did when she was thinking. "Are you still working?" she asked. "Yes," William said. "I have to talk to some people tonight." Annie nodded and walked further into the room. She looked around the office like she always did, as if she were still getting used to the idea that this large, quiet room belonged to the man who now read her bedtime stories. "Is the boy going to get the surgery?" she asked. "I'm trying to make that happen," William said. Annie studied his face for a moment. "You look like when something is very hard," she said. William let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. "It is very hard." Annie walked over and climbed into the big chair across from his desk, her feet not even reaching the floor. "Is it hard because of money?" she asked. "Yes," William said. "Partly." Annie thought about that. Then she asked, "How much money is a life?" William didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her. Really looked at her. This small girl who asked questions that billion-dollar boardrooms never asked. "I don't know," he said finally. Annie nodded slowly, as if she expected that answer. "I think," she said carefully, "maybe money is for buying time. And doctors use time to save people." William felt that same tight feeling in his chest again. "Where did you learn to think like that?" he asked. Annie shrugged a little. "When I was little, the lady at the hospital told me that when people can't breathe, the most important thing is to give them time. She said if you can give someone a little more time, sometimes their body can fix itself." William looked at the inhaler in her hand. "Go to bed," he said softly. "It's late." Annie slid out of the chair but didn't go to the door right away. "Dad?" she said. "Yes? If the board says no, are you still going to help them?" William looked at her for a long time before answering. "That's what I'm trying to decide," he said. Annie walked over to him, leaned forward, and hugged him around the shoulders in the simple, sudden way children do when they decide you need it. Then she whispered, "I think the lady already decided 2 years ago. She helped me before she knew who you were. She didn't have a board meeting first." William closed his eyes for a brief moment and put his arm gently around her. After she went to bed, William Carter sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching out in front of him, his phone on the desk, waiting for the board members to join the emergency call he had just scheduled. Tomorrow morning, a doctor would decide whether a boy could be saved. But tonight, William Carter was going to find out whether a promise was more powerful than a boardroom. The board meeting started at 9:40 p.m. William sat alone in his office, the large screen on the wall slowly filling with faces, as one by one the board members joined the emergency call. Some looked annoyed, some looked curious, and a few looked worried. Emergency meetings usually meant lawsuits, scandals, or losses. In William's world, people were only called this late when something had gone wrong. "All right," said Jonathan Pierce, the senior board member, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and the calm voice of someone who had spent 40 years making difficult decisions without losing sleep. "William, this better be important. You don't call the entire board at night unless the building is on fire." William folded his hands on the desk. "In a way," he said, "it is." He pressed a button, and a file appeared on the screen. A medical report, a name, a number, a projected surgery cost. "This is an insurance denial case. From Street Matthews," William said. 8-year-old patient, cardiac surgery, denied under our high-risk exclusion policy. One of the board members frowned. "And we're here because?" "We deny hundreds of cases like this every year." "Yes," William said, "we do." The room was quiet for a second, waiting for him to continue. "I'm asking the board to approve an exception," William said. "Full coverage for the surgery." Immediately, several faces changed. "That's a multi-million-dollar procedure," said a woman named Karen Holt, "and the survival rate is under 40%. This is exactly the kind of case the exclusion policy was designed for." "The policy was designed to protect the company," William replied. "Not to decide who deserves a chance to live." "That's a nice sentence," said Martin, the head of insurance, who was also on the call. "But our responsibility is to the shareholders." Jonathan Pierce leaned back in his chair, studying William carefully. "Why this case?" the older man asked. "We've never made an exception before." "Why this one?" William could have given a corporate answer. He could have talked about public relations, about goodwill, about strategic charity. Instead, he told the truth. "Because 2 years ago, that boy's mother saved Annie's life," he said, "and I promised her that if she ever needed help, I would help her." The boardroom went completely silent. Some of them knew Annie was adopted. Few of them knew the story. Jonathan Pierce was still watching William very carefully. "So this is personal," he said. "Yes," William answered. Karen Holt shook her head slightly. "William, you're asking us to risk millions of dollars and set a legal precedent because of a personal promise." William didn't look away from the camera. "Yes," he said again. Martin spoke next. "If we approve this, every lawyer in the country will use this case to argue that we have a moral obligation to approve other high-risk procedures. This policy saved the company nearly $300 million over the last 5 years." William nodded once. "I know. I approved the policy, and now you want to break it," Martin said. "Yes," Jonathan Pierce finally spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Let me ask you a different question, William. If the boy dies during surgery, the media finds out we approved an exception, and the shareholders sue the board for misusing company funds. Are you prepared to take responsibility for that? William didn't hesitate. Yes. You personally? Jonathan asked. Yes. I'll cover the entire cost of the surgery myself, not the company. Me. That caused a visible reaction on several faces. Karen leaned forward. That still doesn't solve the precedent problem. William nodded. Then we changed the policy, he said. Now several people started talking at once. Change the policy? You can't be serious. That policy is the reason the division is profitable. You'll open the floodgates. William didn't raise his voice. He just waited until they stopped talking. 5 years ago, he said. We changed the policy because the numbers made sense. Tonight, I'm telling you the numbers are not the only thing that matters. Karen crossed her arms. We are not a charity, William. William looked directly at her through the screen. No, he said, but we are also not supposed to be the reason an 8-year-old dies when we have the ability to help. Silence again. Jonathan Pierce tapped a pen slowly against his desk, thinking, You built this company from nothing. The old man said, You've always been ruthless about numbers. That's why this is surprising. William leaned back slightly in his chair, and for the first time that night, he looked tired. When I was 10 years old, William said, my father got sick. He needed a surgery my family couldn't afford. The insurance company said it was too expensive and too risky. They said the same words we use now. Not cost-effective. Low success rate. No one interrupted him. He died 8 months later, William said, and I remember my mother sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of medical bills and one letter from the insurance company saying they were sorry for our loss, but they were unable to approve the procedure. The room was completely silent now. I built this company so I would never be that powerless again, William said quietly, but somewhere along the way, I built the exact same system that killed my father. No one spoke for a long time. Then Jonathan Pierce asked the only question that mattered. If we approve this, the old man said, this will change the company, possibly permanently. Are you sure that's what you want to do? William thought about Annie sitting in the big chair in his office. He thought about a woman standing at his gate because she had run out of time. He thought about a promise made in a hospital hallway. Yes, William said. I'm sure. Jonathan looked around at the other faces on the screen. All right, he said slowly. We vote. One by one, the board members gave their answers. Some yes, some no, some reluctant, some certain. When it was over, Jonathan looked back at William. The motion passes, he said. By one vote. William didn't move for a moment. William, Jonathan added, you better hope that boy lives. William nodded once. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. When the screen went black and the meeting ended, William sat alone in his office again, the silence heavier than before. Tomorrow morning, a surgeon would look at an 8-year-old boy and decide whether to try. And for the first time in many years, William Carter understood something very clearly. This was not a business decision anymore. This was a debt. William did not sleep much that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house quiet around him. The kind of quiet that only very large houses have soft air vents. Distant wood settling. The faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere far down the hall. Beside the silence, his mind replayed the board meeting over and over again. Each vote, each warning, each number attached to the decision he had just made. By morning, the decision would no longer belong to spreadsheets or board members. It would belong to a surgeon. At 6:30 a.m., William was already dressed when he walked into the kitchen. The sky outside was still pale, the early light just beginning to stretch across the yard. Mrs. Turner was at the stove, and Annie was sitting at the table in her school uniform, swinging her legs slightly as she tried to spread peanut butter evenly across a piece of toast. You're up early, William said. Annie looked up. I couldn't sleep, she said. I kept thinking about the boy. William poured himself a cup of coffee. Me too, he said. Annie watched him carefully. Are we going to the hospital today? Yes, William said. The doctor is going to see him this morning. Annie nodded like she had expected that answer. She pushed the second piece of toast toward him. You should eat, she said. Big decisions are probably harder when you're hungry. William sat down across from her and took a bite, even though he wasn't hungry at all. Are you scared? Annie asked. William thought about that question. He had been nervous before big deals, before court cases, before speeches in rooms full of powerful people. But this felt different. Yes, he said. I am. Annie nodded slowly. Me too, she said. After breakfast, they drove to the hospital together. William usually had a driver, but this time he drove himself. Annie sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, looking out the window as the city moved past them. Hospitals all looked the same from the outside glass: steel, clean lines, big signs with hopeful words written on them. Street Matthews was no different. When they walked inside, people recognized William immediately. Nurses straightened slightly. Administrators appeared quickly, walking faster than they normally would. Someone offered coffee. Someone else offered a private waiting room. William accepted none of it. I'm here to see Daniel, he said. They found the room on the cardiac floor. The woman was sitting beside the bed, exactly where she had probably been all night. She stood up when William and Annie walked in. Good morning, William said. Good morning, she replied, her voice tired but steadier than the night before. They said the surgeon is coming soon. Annie stepped closer to the bed. The boy lying there looked very small against the white sheets, an IV in his arm, wires attached to machines that made quiet, steady sounds. His skin was pale, but his eyes were open. This is Annie, the woman said gently. The girl I told you about. The boy looked at Annie and gave a small smile. Hi, he said. Hi, Annie replied softly. My name is Annie. I'm Daniel, he said. My mom says you're very brave. Annie looked surprised. I don't feel brave, she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. Me neither, he said. But everyone keeps saying it. William stood at the foot of the bed, watching the two children talk like this was just another morning, like this was just another room. A knock came at the door, and an older man with gray hair walked in, carrying a tablet and a file. Dr. Hayes, William said, stepping forward and shaking his hand. The surgeon nodded once, then looked at Daniel, then at the charts, then at the monitors. He didn't say much for several minutes. He examined the chart, asked a few quiet questions, looked at the scans on his tablet, and listened to Daniel's heart with a stethoscope. The room was very quiet while he worked. Finally, Dr. Hayes stepped back and looked at the boy's mother. We need to talk, he said gently. They stepped out into the hallway. William and Annie followed, but stopped a few steps away, giving them space while still close enough to hear. Dr. Hayes spoke quietly, but clearly. The surgery is possible, he said, but it's very complicated. His heart is weak, and there are structural problems that make this operation difficult. If we do nothing, he may have months, maybe a year if he's very lucky. If we do the surgery, he paused. There's about a 30% chance he survives the operation and recovery. The woman nodded slowly. She had probably memorized those numbers already. And if he survives? She asked. He could live a long, normal life, Dr. Hayes said. Go to school, grow up, have a future. The hallway was silent. What do you recommend? She asked. Doctor. Hayes looked back through the glass window into the room where Daniel and Annie were now talking quietly. Two small heads bent toward each other like they had known each other longer than 10 minutes. I recommend we try, the surgeon said, but only if you understand the risk. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. If there's a chance he can live, she said, then we try. Dr. Hayes nodded once. Then he looked at William. Your foundation is covering the surgical team, the doctor said, but the hospital board is still concerned about liability. They want final financial authorization before we schedule the operating room. William held the doctor's gaze. You'll have it, he said. Dr. Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then I'll start preparing my team, he said. We operate in 2 days. When the doctor walked away, William stood in the hallway, looking through the glass at Annie and Daniel talking on the hospital bed. Annie was holding Daniel's hand and showing him how her inhaler worked, explaining it very seriously like she was teaching him something important. The boy listened like it mattered. William realized then that this had already stopped being about a promise a long time ago. Now it was about what kind of world Annie would grow up in. A world where powerful people only protected money, or a world where powerful people protected people. And in 2 days, a surgeon would open a little boy's chest and try to give him a future. But today, William Carter was the one being tested. When William and Annie left the hospital that afternoon, the sky was gray and low, the kind of sky that made the entire city feel quieter. Annie sat in the front passenger seat this time, her hands folded in her lap, unusually silent as William drove. "Dad?" she said after a long time. "Yes? Does Daniel know he might die?" she asked. William kept his eyes on the road. Children had a way of asking the questions adults tried to walk around. "I think he knows he's very sick," William said carefully, "but I don't know if anyone has used that word with him." Annie nodded slowly, looking out the window again. "When I was in the hospital," she said, "I knew something was very wrong because everyone was too nice to me." William glanced at her briefly. "Too nice?" "Yeah," Annie said. "When adults are scared, they become very nice. They talk softly and they bring you juice and they tell you everything is going to be okay even if they don't know that." William didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept driving. When they got home, Annie went to do her homework at the kitchen table, and William went straight back to his office. The moment he closed the door, the world he had stepped out of that morning came rushing back in emails, messages, missed calls, headlines already starting to appear online. He sat down and opened the first email from Martin, the head of insurance. Subject: Board Decision, Policy Exception Case. The email was long, full of legal language and risk assessments. But the important part was simple. The board had approved the exception for Daniel's surgery, but only under William's personal financial responsibility, and with a full legal waiver to protect the company. William leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. He had expected that. Men like the ones on his board did not change systems easily. They allowed exceptions, not transformations. His phone rang. It was Jonathan Pierce. William answered. "Jonathan, you made the news," the old man said without greeting. William opened a browser and saw the headline immediately. "Billionaire intervenes in denied child surgery case." He closed the article without reading it. "That was fast," William said. "It always is," Jonathan replied. "The hospital board leaked it. They're protecting themselves in case the surgery goes wrong." William nodded even though Jonathan couldn't see him. "Of course they are." There was a short silence on the line before Jonathan spoke again. "You know what this means, don't you?" the older man said. "Yes," William said. "If the boy dies, this becomes a story about a billionaire who used his power to force a risky surgery on a child. And if the boy lives," Jonathan added, "it becomes a story about a billionaire hero who saved a child." William looked out the window at the darkening sky. "That's not why I'm doing it." "I know," Jonathan said, "but that's how the world will see it." William didn't respond to that. After he hung up, he sat in silence for a long time, then opened another file, one he hadn't looked at in years. The insurance policy document, the one he had approved. Page after page of legal language, but the important sentence was highlighted in yellow from years ago. High-cost procedures with survival probability below 40% may be denied coverage under executive risk management guidelines. He had signed his name at the bottom of that page. He stared at his signature for a long time. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he said. Annie stepped inside, holding a piece of paper. "I finished my homework," she said, "and I drew something." She walked over and handed him the paper. It was a drawing in crayon. 4 stick figures holding hands. 1 tall man, 1 small girl, 1 woman, 1 boy lying in a bed, with a big heart drawn on his chest. "This is you," Annie said, pointing to the tall figure. "And this is me, and this is Daniel, and his mom." William looked at the drawing for a long time. "Why are we all holding hands?" he asked. Annie shrugged. "Because that's what people do when they're waiting for something scary," she said. "They hold hands so no one has to be scared alone." William felt his throat tighten slightly, and he cleared it before speaking. "Annie," he said, "if the surgery doesn't work, Daniel might not come home from the hospital." Annie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. You know? William asked. She nodded. I heard the doctor talking in the hallway, she said. He said 30%. William leaned back in his chair. Are you angry that I didn't help them sooner? He asked quietly. Annie thought about that for a long moment before answering. I think, she said slowly, sometimes grown-ups think they have a lot of time to be good people. But maybe we don't. William looked at her, really looked at her. This small girl who had walked into his office a few days ago and unknowingly started a chain of decisions that was now changing everything. I'm trying to fix it now, he said. Annie nodded. I know, she said. That's why I'm not angry. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door and looked back at him. Dad? Yes? If Daniel lives, she said, do you think his mom will still be tired all the time? William thought about the woman sitting in the hospital chair, the way she held her hands together like she was holding herself in place. Maybe not as tired, he said. Annie smiled a little. Good, she said, because she looks like she hasn't rested in a very long time. After Annie went to bed that night, William stayed in his office again. The drawing still lying on his desk next to the insurance policy with his signature on it. He looked from the drawing to the policy and back again. One paper showed the system he had built. The other showed the reason he was about to change it. The morning of the surgery arrived quietly. Hospitals were strange places in the early morning. The lights were always on, the floors always clean, the machines always making the same steady sounds, but everything felt softer before the day fully began. Voices were lower, footsteps were slower. Even fear seemed to move more quietly in the early hours. William and Annie arrived just after 6 a.m. The surgery was scheduled for 7:30. Daniel was already awake when they entered the room. He was sitting up slightly in the bed, a thin blanket over his lap, a hospital bracelet around his wrist that looked too big for his arm. His mother stood by the window, speaking quietly with a nurse. But when she saw William and Annie, she immediately walked over. You came, she said. I said I would, William replied. Daniel looked at Annie and smiled. You came too, he said. Of course, Annie said, walking over to the bed. I brought you something. She held out a small folded piece of paper. Daniel opened it carefully. It was another drawing this time, a picture of a big heart, with 4 people standing around it. Above the heart, Annie had written in careful, uneven letters. For Daniel, so you can use this one until yours is fixed. Daniel stared at the drawing for a long time. Thank you, he said quietly. I think this is a very good heart. Annie nodded seriously. I made it extra strong, she said, so you have to give it back after the surgery. Daniel smiled a little. Okay, he said. A few minutes later, Dr. Hayes walked in with 2 nurses and a younger doctor. He explained the procedure again, calm and clear, the way people do when they have explained the same thing many times but know it is the first time the family is truly hearing it. We'll take good care of him, Dr. Hayes said to Daniel's mother. I need you to be brave for a few hours. She nodded, but she couldn't speak. When the nurses came to take Daniel to the operating room, he looked at his mother first. She leaned down and hugged him very carefully, like she was afraid he might break. I'll be right here when you wake up, she whispered. Then Daniel looked at William. Are you the man who made the phone calls? He asked. William nodded once. Yes, he said. Mom said you're very busy, Daniel said. Thank you for not being too busy this time. William felt that sentence land somewhere deep inside his chest. You're welcome, he said quietly. Then Daniel looked at Annie. Don't forget to take care of my heart, he said, holding up the drawing. I will, Annie said. You just focus on the doctor. They wheeled him out, the bed moving slowly down the hallway until it disappeared through the double doors marked surgery. And just like that, there was nothing left to do but wait. Waiting rooms were designed for bad news. Uncomfortable chairs, old magazines, coffee that never tasted right. William had sat in rooms like this before, many years ago, when he had been young and powerless and waiting for doctors to tell him whether his father was going to live or die. He had never forgotten the feeling of being a child in a room where adults spoke in quiet voices and avoided your eyes. Now he was the adult in the room, Daniel's mother sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Annie sat beside her, swinging her feet slightly but not saying much, just staying close. After about an hour, Annie reached into her small pocket and took out her inhaler, turning it slowly in her hands like she did when she was nervous. Daniel's mother noticed. "Do you need it?" she asked gently. "Not right now," Annie said. "I just like to hold it when I'm scared." The woman nodded. "I understand," she said. They sat like that for hours. Nurses came and went. A volunteer offered sandwiches. No one was hungry. At one point, Annie leaned her head against William's arm and fell asleep. William didn't move, afraid to wake her. He just sat there, one arm around his daughter, across from a mother who was waiting to find out if she still had a son. After what felt like an entire day but was only 4 hours, the double doors finally opened and Dr. Hayes walked into the waiting room, still wearing his surgical cap. Everyone stood up at the same time. For a moment, the doctor didn't say anything. He pulled the cap off slowly, and William saw the exhaustion on his face. "Well?" Daniel's mother asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Doctor?" Hayes looked at her, then at William, then at Annie, who was now awake and holding the drawing in both hands like it was something alive. "The surgery was very difficult," the doctor said. "There were a few moments where we thought we were going to lose him." Daniel's mother covered her mouth with her hand. "But, Doctor," Hayes continued. And now there was the smallest hint of a smile on his face. "His heart is beating on its own. The repair held. He's in recovery now." The woman didn't cry right away. She just stood there like her body didn't understand the words yet. "He's alive?" she asked. "Yes," Dr. Hayes said. "He's alive. The next 48 hours are still very important, but the surgery was successful." That was when her legs gave out and she had to sit down because she couldn't hold herself up anymore. Annie looked up at William with wide eyes. "Does that mean he gets to keep my heart drawing?" she asked. William smiled for the first time in days. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think he does." Across the room, Daniel's mother was crying now. Her face in her hands. The kind of crying that comes from relief, so big it hurts. William sat back in the waiting room chair and looked at Annie, then at the woman, then at the surgery doors. For the first time since the woman had appeared at his gate, he allowed himself to breathe. But deep down, he knew something else too. Saving one boy was a miracle. Changing the system that almost killed him that was going to be a war. The first time Daniel opened his eyes after the surgery, it was late afternoon. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the soft sound of air moving through the oxygen line near his bed. His mother was sitting in the chair beside him, her head resting near his arm, asleep in the uncomfortable position of someone who had not truly rested in weeks, but whose body had finally shut down from exhaustion. William stood near the window, speaking quietly with Dr. Hayes, while Annie sat in the chair on the other side of the bed, holding the folded heart drawing carefully in both hands like she was guarding something important. Daniel's fingers moved first. Just a small twitch. Annie saw it immediately. "He moved," she whispered. His mother woke instantly. "Daniel," she said, leaning forward. "Daniel, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then slowly finding her face. "Mom?" he whispered. His voice was dry and weak. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and leaned down carefully so she wouldn't touch any of the wires. "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here." Daniel blinked slowly, then looked around the room. His eyes landed on Annie. "You still have it?" he asked, his voice barely more than air. Annie quickly held up the drawing. "Of course," she said. "I told you I would take care of it." Daniel gave the smallest smile. "You can keep it a little longer," he said. "I think mine still needs help." Dr. Hayes stepped forward and checked the monitors, then nodded once to William. "He's doing well," the doctor said quietly. "Better than I expected for the first few hours. If he makes it through the next 2 days without complications, his chances go up a lot." Daniel's mother closed her eyes again, but this time she was smiling through the tears. "Thank you," she said to Dr. Hayes. "Thank you for trying." The old surgeon shook his head slightly. "Thank him," he said, nodding toward William. "I only did my job. He's the reason your son was on my operating table in the first place." The woman turned to William, but for a moment she couldn't speak. There are some kinds of gratitude that are too big for words, and this was one of them. "You kept your promise," she said finally. William shook his head slightly. "No," he said quietly. "I was 2 years late. You kept yours first." She didn't understand at first, and then she did. 2 years ago, she had helped a child she didn't know. She had made a decision in a hospital hallway without knowing it would come back to her one day. That was how promises worked sometimes. They traveled in circles. They came back when you least expected them. That evening, William and Annie went back home for the first time in 3 days. The house felt different when they walked in. Quieter in a different way. Like something important had happened, and the walls knew it. Annie went straight to the kitchen and climbed onto one of the tall chairs. "Can we bring them dinner tomorrow?" she asked. "Who?" William asked. Though he already knew, "Daniel and his mom," Annie said. "Hospital food is very sad." William loosened his tie slightly and sat down across from her. "Yes," he said. "We can bring them dinner." Annie nodded like that was a very important problem solved. "Dad?" she said after a moment. "Yes? Are you still in trouble with your company?" she asked. William leaned back in the chair and thought about the emails, the headlines, the board members who had voted yes, and the ones who had not. "Yes," he said. "A little." Annie considered that. "But you saved him," she said. "So that's good trouble, right?" William smiled slightly. "Yeah," he said. "That's good trouble." The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire overrules own company to save child. Insurance giant makes rare exception after CEO intervenes. Power, money, and a promise. The story behind the surgery. William sat in his office reading the articles, but the words didn't affect him the way they would have a week ago. Some articles called him a hero. Some called him reckless. Some said he had created a dangerous precedent. Some said he had done what any decent man should do. He closed the laptop. The door opened and Annie walked in, already dressed for school. "Mrs. Turner said the driver is ready," she said. Then she looked at his face. "Are the news people being mean?" "Some of them," William said. Annie walked over and climbed into the chair across from his desk again. "Dad," she said, "remember when you told me that being rich means people watch you all the time?" "Yes," he said. "And you said that means you have to be careful what you teach people." Annie continued. "Because when you're rich, people copy what you do." William nodded slowly. "I remember." Annie looked at him very seriously now. "Then I think it's good they're watching you help," she said. "Because maybe other rich people will copy you and help people too." William didn't speak for a moment. He had spent most of his life believing power was about control, controlling markets, controlling outcomes, controlling risk. But sitting there, looking at a 6-year-old girl who was trying to understand the world using nothing but simple logic and a very honest heart, he realized something else. Power was also about example. Later that day, William went back to the hospital alone. Daniel was still in recovery, still weak, but when he saw William, he lifted his hand slightly in a small wave. "Hi," Daniel said. "Hi," William replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "My mom said you're very rich," Daniel said. William smiled a little. "Your mom shouldn't tell you things like that." Daniel shrugged slightly. "She said rich people are busy because they're important." William thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "No, rich people are busy because they think what they're doing is important. Sometimes they're wrong." Daniel looked at him carefully, like he was trying to understand that sentence. "Are you important?" the boy asked. William looked at the machines, the wires, the small hand resting on the blanket. "No," William said quietly. "But helping you was." When William left Daniel's hospital room that afternoon, he did not go back to the office right away. Instead, he found himself standing in the long hospital corridor, looking out a window that showed nothing but a parking lot and a gray sky. Hospitals had a way of making people think about their lives in straight lines, what mattered, what didn't. What you would regret if you ran out of time. He stood there long enough that Dr. Hayes eventually walked up beside him, holding a tablet and a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "He's doing better than expected," the surgeon said, looking out the same window. "Strong kid." William nodded. "His mother is strong too." Dr. Hayes gave a small smile. "The strong ones are usually the ones who have no choice." They stood in silence for a moment before the doctor spoke again. "You know this isn't over, right?" he said. "The surgery was the easy part." William looked at him. "Open heart surgery on an 8-year-old is the easy part?" Dr. Hayes nodded slightly. "Cutting people open and fixing what's broken. That's technical. We train for that. What comes after is harder. Recovery, bills, therapy, school, life. Surviving the surgery is one battle. Surviving the world after the surgery is another." William understood what he meant. Medical bills, insurance battles, time off work, a mother trying to keep a job while taking care of a child who would need months to fully recover. "I'm setting up a fund," William said, "for his recovery, and for cases like his." Dr. Hayes looked at him carefully. "That's a big decision." William nodded. "So was last night." The doctor studied him for a moment longer, then said something William did not expect. "You know why I agreed to look at the boy?" Dr. Hayes asked. William assumed it was because of the foundation, or the money, or the influence. "Because I asked you to," he said. Dr. Hayes shook his head. "No. I agreed because 20 years ago, a man like you called a hospital and asked a surgeon to operate on a factory worker who couldn't afford heart surgery. That surgeon was me, and the factory worker was my brother." William blinked, surprised. "He lived another 15 years, Dr. Hayes said. Got to see his daughter graduate. Got to meet his grandson, all because someone with money decided to make a phone call." William didn't know what to say. Dr. Hayes took a sip of his cold coffee and made a face. "Most people think power is money," the old surgeon said. "It's not. Power is the ability to change someone's story." Then he walked away down the hallway, leaving William standing there alone with that sentence. Power is the ability to change someone's story. That night, William called another board meeting. Not an emergency meeting this time. A scheduled one. Formal. Recorded. When everyone was on the call, he didn't start with numbers. "I'm creating a new division," he said. "A medical approval review board funded by my personal shares. Its purpose is to review denied high-risk cases for children and approve surgeries when there is a reasonable chance of survival." Karen Holt immediately frowned. "William, we already discussed this. One exception is one thing. Building an entire system around it is something else." "Yes," William said. "It is." Martin, the insurance director, leaned forward. "Do you have any idea how many cases like this there are every year?" "Yes," William said. "I asked for the numbers this morning. Around 312 pediatric high-risk denials last year. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs." "That's exactly why the policy exists," Martin said. "If we approved all of those, the division would collapse." "I'm not asking the company to approve all of them," William said. "I'm saying I will." The room went quiet. "I will fund the surgeries personally," William continued, "through a foundation. The company keeps its policy. The board keeps its structure, but no child gets denied without a second review from a human being who has to look at a mother and explain the decision to her face." No one spoke for several seconds. Jonathan Pierce finally said, "You're serious?" "Yes," William said. Karen leaned back in her chair. "Why?" she asked. "You already kept your promise. The boy lived. Why change everything?" William thought about Annie sitting in the hospital chair, holding a drawing of a heart. He thought about a woman standing at his gate because she had run out of time. He thought about his father and a letter from an insurance company. "Because I was lucky," William said. This time, the story ended well, but there are hundreds of families every year whose stories end in waiting rooms, and most of them never meet someone like me. Jonathan nodded slowly. "And this is how you plan to spend the rest of your life? Fighting your own system?" William didn't even hesitate. Yes. After the meeting ended, William sat alone in his office again, but this time the silence felt different. Not heavy, not empty. Just quiet. A few minutes later, Annie knocked and walked in wearing her pajamas again. "Mrs. Turner said I should be in bed," she said. "But I wanted to say goodnight." William opened his arms and she walked over and hugged him. "Daniel is going to live," she said into his shoulder, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "Yes," William said. "He is." Annie pulled back and looked at him. "Dad? Yes? Did you fix the rule?" she asked. William smiled a little. "I'm working on it," he said. Annie nodded, satisfied. Then she said something very quietly, something that sounded like a child but felt like it came from someone much older. "I think maybe the lady didn't just save me 2 years ago," Annie said. "I think she saved you too." William didn't answer right away, because deep down, he knew she was right. The next few days settled into a quiet routine that felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. William went to work in the mornings, but he spent his afternoons at the hospital. Annie went to school, then insisted on stopping by Daniel's room every evening, always bringing something small, a drawing, a book, once even a small puzzle, she said was for when you get bored of being brave. Daniel grew stronger a little more each day. The first time he was able to sit up for more than 10 minutes, Annie clapped like he had just won a race. The first time he walked 3 steps with the nurse beside him, his mother cried again, but this time she didn't try to hide it. One evening, about a week after the surgery, William arrived at the hospital to find Daniel and Annie sitting at the small table near the window, both of them drawing very seriously. "What are you two working on?" William asked. "A plan," Annie said without looking up. "A plan for what?" he asked. Daniel looked up and held up his paper. It was a drawing of a building with a big sign on it that said, "Hospital for Kids Who Don't Have Money." William pulled a chair over and sat down. "That's a very specific plan," he said. Daniel nodded. "Hospitals fix hearts," he said. "But someone has to fix the bills." William leaned back in the chair and looked at the drawing for a long moment. "You know," he said slowly, "I've been thinking about something like that." Daniel's mother, who had been standing by the window talking to a nurse, turned and looked at him. "You've already done more than enough," she said quickly. "You don't owe us anything anymore." William shook his head. "This isn't about owing," he said. "It's about how many Daniels there are that I never see." The room was quiet after that. Later that night, after Annie had gone to bed, William sat in his office with a stack of reports in front of him. Numbers, charts, denials, approvals, survival rates, costs, risk assessments. But now, every number had a face. He saw Daniel in the survival rate column. He saw Daniel's mother in the unpaid bill column. He saw Annie in every line that said pediatric case. Around midnight, he opened his laptop and began writing something that was not a business plan and not a legal document. It was something in between, a proposal for a new foundation. Not just for one hospital, but for many. A review board made up of doctors, not executives. Cases reviewed by people who understood medicine and consequences, not just finance and risk. He worked for hours, writing, deleting, rewriting. At some point, he realized he was not doing this because of a promise anymore. He was doing it because he finally understood something he should have understood a long time ago. Systems don't change because they are fair. Systems change because someone with power decides they are no longer acceptable. The next morning, he brought the proposal to Jonathan Pierce. The old man read it slowly, page by page, occasionally adjusting his glasses, occasionally looking up at William like he was trying to see not just the man sitting in front of him, but the boy he used to be. When he finished, he closed the folder and leaned back. "This is not a small thing," Jonathan said. "I know," William replied. "You're talking about tens of millions of dollars a year," Jonathan continued. "I know. You're talking about changing how the company interacts with hospitals, with insurance, with the public," Jonathan said. "I know." Jonathan studied him for a long moment. "This isn't about one boy anymore, is it?" William shook his head. "No," he said. "It's not." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Because if you were doing this for one boy, it would be a mistake. But if you're doing it because you finally understand the system you built, then maybe it's the first smart thing you've done in years. William almost smiled at that. Jonathan pushed the folder back across the desk. You'll have opposition, he said. A lot of it. Investors, analysts, maybe even some of your own executives. I know, William said again. Jonathan nodded. Then you better be very sure, the old man said. Because once you start this, you don't get to stop when it becomes inconvenient. William thought about a woman standing at a gate. He thought about a small girl holding an inhaler and asking him questions no board member had ever asked. He thought about a boy drawing a hospital where no one had to worry about money. I'm sure, he said. That evening, William went back to the hospital again. Daniel was sitting up in bed, and Annie was reading a book out loud to him, very seriously, like a tiny teacher. Daniel's mother stood when William walked in. I talked to my boss today, she said. I told them I might not be able to come back to work full-time for a while because Daniel will need therapy and checkups. I thought they were going to fire me. What did they say? William asked. She smiled a little, still not used to smiling yet. They said someone had already called them and arranged a flexible schedule and medical leave. William looked at her. I thought that might help, he said. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed again. I don't know how to thank you, she said. William looked at Daniel and Annie, who were now arguing about how to pronounce a word in the book. Take care of your son, William said. That's enough. He turned to leave, but Daniel called out, Mr. Carter? William turned back. Yes? Daniel held up the heart drawing Annie had made. I think I can give this back soon, he said. I think mine is getting stronger. William smiled. I think you're right, he said. As he walked out of the hospital that night, William realized something had changed in a way that could not be undone. 2 years ago, in a hospital hallway, he had made a promise to repay a kindness. But somewhere along the way, that promise had turned into something else. It had turned into a responsibility. A week after Daniel's surgery, the hospital room looked different. The machines were still there, but fewer of them were connected to him now. The constant beeping had slowed to a steady rhythm instead of a nervous one. The curtains were open, and sunlight filled the room in a way that made it feel less like a place where bad news lived. Daniel was sitting in a chair instead of lying in the bed, a blanket around his shoulders, concentrating very hard on a small stack of cards Annie had brought with her. You're cheating, Annie said, narrowing her eyes at him. I am not, Daniel said. I'm just winning. That's the same thing, Annie replied. William stood by the window with Daniel's mother, watching the two children argue about rules they were both changing as they went. He's stronger, William said. Yes, she replied softly. Every day he's a little stronger. She was different now too. The deep exhaustion in her face had softened. She still looked tired, but it was the tired of someone who had been through a storm and could finally see land again. The doctor said he might be able to go home in a week, she said. I don't think I've slept properly in a year, but for the first time I think I might be able to. William nodded. When he goes home, a nurse will visit twice a week, he said. And the physical therapist will come to your apartment. You won't have to bring him back and forth for every appointment. She looked at him quickly. You've already done enough. You don't have to keep doing this. William shook his head slightly. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. She didn't argue again. Some people understood gratitude as a quiet thing, not something you repeated out loud too many times. Across the room, Annie and Daniel were now building something with the cards. A small, careful tower that kept falling and being rebuilt again. Why do you keep fixing it when it falls? Daniel asked. Annie looked at him like the answer was obvious. Because that's how you make it taller, she said. William heard that and almost smiled to himself. Children understood persistence better than most adults. Mr. Carter? Daniel said suddenly, looking over at him. Yes, William replied, walking closer. Daniel hesitated, then said, Mom told me that you changed the rules at your company because of me. William pulled a chair over and sat down so he was at eye level with him. Not just because of you, he said. Because of a lot of kids like you. Daniel thought about that. Does that mean other kids will get surgery too? He asked. Yes, William said. That's the plan. Daniel nodded slowly, like he was trying to understand something very big with a very small amount of life experience. Then when I grow up, Daniel said, I'm going to be a doctor and do the surgeries for the kids whose parents are scared. His mother turned away slightly, covering her mouth with her hand again. But this time she was smiling. That sounds like a very good plan, William said. Daniel looked down at the scar on his chest, visible above the collar of his hospital shirt. He touched it very gently. Dr. Hayes said this scar means someone fixed my heart, Daniel said, but I think a lot of people fixed it. Not just him. William didn't know what to say to that. That evening, after Annie had gone to bed, William sat alone in the living room instead of his office. The lights were low, and the house was quiet. On the coffee table in front of him was Annie's drawing, the one with the 4 stick figures holding hands around the big heart. He had kept it. He picked it up and looked at it again, studying the uneven lines, the oversized heart, the way Annie had drawn everyone smiling, even though at the time none of them knew how the story would end. He thought about the last few weeks and how close he had come to doing nothing, how easy it would have been to stay in that meeting, to tell Annie to ask the woman to make an appointment, to let the system continue working exactly as it was designed to work. He thought about how many times in his life he had used the phrase, "It's just business." Now that sentence felt different to him, smaller, less certain. Around 10 p.m., his phone rang. It was Jonathan Pierce. "You're becoming very popular," the old man said, without greeting. "That doesn't sound like a compliment," William replied. "It's not," Jonathan said. "Investors are nervous. Some of them think you're turning the company into a charity. Others think you're trying to fix a broken system. The problem is, those two things look very similar on paper." William leaned back on the couch. "Which one do you think I'm doing?" he asked. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. "I think," the old man said slowly, "you're trying to sleep at night." William didn't answer, because that was exactly right. "There's a board meeting next week," Jonathan continued. "Not about the boy, about the foundation you want to build. You're going to have to convince people who have never sat in a hospital waiting room that this makes sense." William looked down at Annie's drawing again. "I'm not sure it's supposed to make sense," he said. "I think it's just supposed to be right." Jonathan chuckled softly. "That's a very expensive way to think, William." "Probably," William said. After he hung up, William sat there a long time in the quiet house, holding a child's drawing of a heart, and thinking about boardrooms, policies, promises, and the strange way one decision could change the direction of a life. Upstairs, Annie was asleep, probably dreaming in the simple, fearless way children do when they believe the adults in their life will keep them safe. William turned off the lights and sat there in the dark for a few more minutes before going to bed. In a week, Daniel would go home. In a week, the board would vote on the foundation, and William Carter knew that the surgery had not been the hardest part of this story. The hardest part was going to be changing the world that had made that surgery necessary in the first place. The day Daniel went home, the hospital room felt almost like a small celebration. There were no balloons, no loud voices, no big party, but there was a quiet happiness in the room that felt stronger than any decoration. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, carefully putting on his shoes while his mother folded the few clothes they had brought with them. Annie stood very close. Watching like this was a very important operation that required her full attention. "Don't tie them too tight," Annie said seriously. "Your chest is still healing, so you shouldn't bend too much." Daniel looked up at her. "You sound like a doctor." "I'm not a doctor," Annie said. "I'm just bossy." Daniel grinned. "That's true." "Dan..." William stood by the door speaking quietly with Dr. Hayes, who was holding a clipboard and reading through discharge instructions. "He'll need to take it slow for a while," the doctor said. "Short walks, no running, regular checkups. But if he keeps improving like this, he should be able to live a normal life." "Thank you," William said, "for everything." Dr. Hayes shook his head slightly. "You already thanked me," he said. "If you really want to thank me, build that review board you were talking about. I'm too old to keep fixing hearts that should have been fixed years earlier because of paperwork." William nodded. "I'm working on it." "I know," the old surgeon said. "That's why I said yes when you called." Across the room, Daniel finished tying his shoes and stood up carefully. He looked smaller standing there than he had in the hospital bed. but he also looked stronger, like something inside him had been repaired in more ways than one. "Are you ready to go home?" his mother asked. Daniel nodded. Then he looked at William. "Mr. Carter?" he said. William walked over and knelt slightly so they were at the same height again. "Yes?" Daniel held out the folded drawing Annie had made weeks ago. The paper was worn now, folded and unfolded many times. "I think you should keep this," Daniel said, "because you helped fix my heart. So maybe you should have the drawing now." William looked at the paper but didn't take it immediately. "I think you should keep it," he said. "To remind you how strong you are." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "So you don't forget why you changed the rules." For a moment, William couldn't speak. Then he took the drawing very carefully, like it was something fragile and important. "I won't forget," he said quietly. Daniel's mother walked over and stood in front of William. For a second, it looked like she was going to say something formal, something polite, the kind of thank you people say when they don't have words big enough for what they feel. Instead, she did something else. She hugged him. It was quick and a little awkward, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed, but it was real. "You kept your promise," she said softly. William shook his head. "You saved my daughter," he replied. "We're even." She pulled back and looked at Annie, who immediately stepped forward and hugged her too. "Can we visit?" Annie asked. "After Daniel goes home?" The woman smiled. "You can visit any time you want," she said. "Your family now." Annie looked very satisfied with that answer. A week later, William stood in a boardroom again. The same long table, the same people, the same screens and documents, and serious faces. But this time, Annie's drawing was in his briefcase. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't start with numbers. He didn't start with charts. He took the drawing out and placed it on the table in front of the board. Some of them looked confused. Some of them looked annoyed. Jonathan Pierce just looked interested. "This," William said, "is why we're here." Karen Holt frowned slightly. "William, with all due respect, we're here to discuss a foundation proposal, not a child's drawing." William nodded. "Yes," he said, "we are, and this drawing is the reason the foundation needs to exist." He told them the story then. Not the version from the newspapers. Not the business version. The real version. A woman in a hospital 2 years ago. A promise made in a hallway. Missed phone calls. A denied surgery. A board vote. A little girl who asked simple questions no one in a boardroom had ever asked him before. When he finished, the room was very quiet. "You're asking us to support something that will cost a lot of money," Karen said finally. "Yes," William said. "You're asking us to change policies that made this company successful," Martin added. "Yes," William said again. Jonathan Pierce leaned forward slightly. "No," the old man said. "He's not asking us to change the policies that made this company successful. He's asking us to change the policies that decide what kind of company this is going to be from now on." No one spoke after that. William looked around the table at the people who had helped him build an empire. People who understood profit, growth, and risk better than almost anyone. "I built this company so I would never be powerless again," William said quietly. "But power without responsibility is just another kind of poverty. We have the ability to change how this system works. So the only question left is whether we will." He didn't talk for another 10 minutes. He didn't argue. He didn't try to sell it like a business deal. He just left the drawing on the table. In the end, they voted. Not everyone said yes, but enough of them did. That night, when William came home, Annie was already in her pajamas, sitting on the couch waiting for him. "Well?" she asked the moment he walked in. William took the drawing out of his briefcase and handed it back to her. "We're building it," he said. "The review board, the foundation, all of it." Annie looked down at the drawing, then back up at him. "So more kids get to have their hearts fixed?" she asked. "Yes," William said. Annie smiled, then wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. "I'm glad that lady came to the gate," she said. William held her for a moment, looking out over the quiet house, thinking about a promise made in a hospital hallway, a woman who refused to give up, a boy with a repaired heart, and a little girl who had asked the right questions at the right time. Me too, he said softly. And for the first time in many years, William Carter felt like the life he had built and the man he had become were finally the same person. This story reminds us that power and success mean very little if they are not used to help others. Sometimes, the biggest mistakes in life are not the things we do wrong, but the good things we delay because we think we have more time. A promise, a small act of kindness, or one decision to help someone can change an entire life. The story teaches us that true wealth is not measured by money, but by responsibility, compassion, and the courage to do the right thing when it is difficult. In the end, the billionaire did not just save a boy's life, the little girl and the boy saved his heart too, by reminding him what truly matters in life. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.